In this episode, we're talking about a whole bunch of roguelike deck builders, plus a couple of new spins on classic formulas in what could be the final episode of the podcast. But don't stay there in suspense. Keep listening for this and more on Indie Game Arcade. Welcome back to Indie Game Arcade, a podcast that deep dives into the latest and greatest indie games. I'm your roguelike deck building dad. My name's Chris, flying solo for what might be the final time. Now, I'll go ahead and bury the lead. This could be the final episode of the podcast. What we're going to do is put the podcast on hiatus for a little while. Nothing bad has happened. I just want to get that out there really quick before anybody panics. I know it seems weird because Joseph was off of the last podcast because he was filming out in LA. That has nothing to do with it. It's actually just kind of a weird coincidence. One thing that is happening is both Joseph and myself are both moving in around the same time period. So both of us are kind of like scraping for time right now, which is making the podcast very, very hard to do, especially when we are being pulled in other directions, like him having to go for filming and me working on a new voiceover project for an RPG, which means a ton of dialogue, and it is keeping me very, very busy. In addition to that, Indie Game Arcade's parent company, which is, owned by me and Joseph, we've decided to take some things in a slight pivot and do a little bit of a reset for some stuff. Since we were going to have to take a temporary step back for a few weeks, we decided to extend that for a little bit, put things on hiatus, and figure out the full refresh. So there's going to be some really huge changes to Nerd Sloth as a whole. We will keep letting you know all those things on social media and all that stuff. We just ask that you bear with us through this change, and we'll get through it together, I promise. Now that said, I've got quite a few games that I want to talk about, but I am going to talk about all of them fairly briefly. But the big one I really want to talk about is Slay the Spire 2. Game start! Obviously, this is still in early access, developed and published by Megacrit, and even though we usually don't talk about things that are early access, we do every once in a while if it is a game that really, really speaks to us. The last one that I can really think about that we went into great detail on that was in early access was Ovis Loop back in 2025, which really, really impressed us, so we wanted to bring it forward. Obviously, Slay the Spire 2 is probably the biggest indie game of the year so far. Well, it is. It already has, within its first couple of weeks, 500,000 players, which is insane. We thought Mugenics was big because Mugenics broke all the records, right? Slay the Spire 2 is already surpassed Mugenics in all of those ways. Unfathomable. Indie games are just dominating the gaming industry right now. And it is very exciting to see. So let's talk about Slay the Spire 2. If you've played the original game, then you know the formula. In fact, if you have played any roguelike deck builder at all, you know the formula. Because all of those formulas owe itself back to the original Slay the Spire. Not to say that every game is emulating it, but every game has taken some bit of structure or some inspiration from that original game. What this game is adding is new characters and bits of lore and stuff like that from the original game, which is really cool. As a lore hound, I am loving the idea that I am learning more about this world. I have to say, the new characters are honestly my favorite. Absolutely, hands down, my favorite. Now, in the original game, my favorite character to play was the Silent. And what I liked to do with that character was a poison build. That's the one that kind of saw me through the majority of my runs. I would experiment with other characters. The only character I really just never got a handle on, I felt like, was the Defect. But I really, really enjoyed the Silent. However, in Slay the Spire 2, I feel like I have not had nearly the amount of luck with a poison build on Silent this time. So I'm not sure why that is. It's just feels like whenever I try that run, it just does not work out for me. The runs I am enjoying, though I enjoy the Regent quite a bit. I really want to make a build around his blade work, but I feel like I have not figured that out yet. I don't know if others are experiencing that as well, but I feel like I do fairly well with him until, I try to use the blade. And every time I do, that pretty much seals the deal. And then I'm going to start losing the run. So that I'm still trying to figure out. Ironclad is reliable. That one works really well, especially just power stacking there. That one works great, and I love that. But I got to say my favorite so far is the Necrobinder. My favorite build right now is just doing a Doom build. And that kind of feels like the equivalent of how I used to feel about doing a poison build with Silent. But the Doom build actually, in a weird way, kind of reminds me of some of my favorite builds playing Monster Train, or Monster Train 2 specifically. Because you can apply stacks of something pretty similar in Monster Train 2. And that was one of my favorite builds to do. And what's really interesting and something that I want to bring up too is the idea, this is related, I promise, of how they went about doing this sequel. And there's some criticism there, and I'm not going to say too much criticism for myself, but there is some community criticism from the idea of both this game and Monster Train 2 being more like 1.5s rather than sequels, because the gameplay is almost exactly the same, just with, additional characters. In Monster Train 2, it was the addition of different clans and stuff, but they did add different modes and, a few other things like weapons, stuff like that. But essentially, the gameplay in and of itself is exactly the same. And I'm trying to kind of get wrap my head around the balance of all of that, because it's one of those things of to me, these are the exact kind of sequels that I want from a game like this. A game like Slay the Spire that game was basically perfect. It was nailing the exact thing that everyone wanted it to do. So if we were going to have a sequel, why would we want to completely change the formula? Think about how many times a AAA studio has done something like that. Even, I was going to say beloved, Nintendo's not nearly as beloved as they used to be back in the day. But think about how many times they made a huge shift in how one of their franchises was done. Some of you might not be old enough to remember, but there was a huge shift in the Legend of Zelda series back in the day, because we went from, in 2000, we had Majora's Mask for the N64. Then the GameCube comes and we get Wind Waker in, I think it was 2002 or 2003. And what a lot of folks might not remember from around that time period, or maybe you just weren't old enough to know. And Wind Waker's looked back upon now as a very beloved game. People love that game. At the time when it came out, people hated that game. They were super angry that we went from Ocarina of Time. That was this, wonderful, maybe one of the greatest games of all time, but a serious take, a serious story with some childhood, sort of nostalgia and whimsy tied into it. And then to Majora's Mask, which went even farther down the idea of being a darker story and a more serious story with a serious tone and a little bit of creepiness and a tiny bit of horror to it. Psychologically. And then we went to a very, very lighthearted, what feels like One Piece inspired sort of world where everything is bright and vibrant and silly and happy-go-lucky in a lot of ways, even though there are some, darker parts to the backstory of it all. But people were very, very angry at the time. And a lot of people just did not want to play it, especially like a lot of people that I knew were like, I am not going to do this. I am going to wait until, something else comes out. And like when Twilight Princess came out, that's when everybody was just like, this is the game that we wanted, not that cartoony thing. So it's like one of those arguments of a lot of people are, will say that gamers don't really know what they want until they get it. So I don't know. I think it's one of those cases of there's always going to be a naysayer, obviously. I think that what they did here was the smartest thing they could have done, which is take the formula that's working, add more into it. I think that there's still some balance that needs to be done. And obviously, that's literally the reason that they're in early access right now, because I think there are still some builds, and I was kind of saying, earlier, that just aren't completely there yet, like aren't fully balanced, but that also could be, user error. And maybe it is more balanced than I think it is. And I'm just not wrapping my head around these things completely yet, but hopefully I'll get there. But I do think that there's some things that could still be worked on. I do really love, though, and I want to give them credit for this, the idea that they are, and they did this purposefully. In the lore, when you're unlocking those epics through that timeline and everything, they have all that placeholder art, and it's just very crudely drawn like MS Paint style things. I love that they did that when so many games, and especially like games with bigger budgets, right? Like your Clear Obscure Expedition 33. I'm not going to knock them. They made a fantastic game. That game is a work of art. I think it's one of the greatest games possibly of all time, but they still used AI-generated placeholder art, and that still rubs me the wrong way. The idea that they're just like, you know what, we don't have to do that. We'll just use MS Paint and draw something and put it in there until we're ready to put in the real thing. And they released it in early access still with those silly drawings in there, and they're just like, yeah, man, we're not going to use AI for this. I love that. That endears me so much more to the developers of this game. I am so happy about it. So I can't speak much more to this at the moment. Again, I was trying to be very brief about all the games we're going to talk about today, but I just wanted to say I am enjoying the hell out of this game. I think it's fantastic. I don't mind at all that it feels like a 1.5. I don't mind at all that Monster Train 2 felt like a 1.5. I played the hell out of Monster Train 2 when that came out, and I'm still playing it. I'm going to be playing this probably for the rest of the year. So, like, if you were wondering in the weeks, possibly months that the podcast is on hiatus, what are Chris and Joseph doing? We're probably playing a lot of Slay the Spire 2 while we plan out how things are going to go, and in between, like, checking out new things. So, yeah, just know that we're playing those. Let me move on to another deck builder that I wanted to talk about real quick. This is a crazy one that you may or may not have seen. I don't know really what the community consensus on this one is, but it's obviously a much, much, much smaller game than Slay the Spire 2. This is Pluto. This one is absolutely insane. And I will say right off the bat that the first time I played this, I played it very wrong because, like, I won't say anything other than, like, I'm a little 420 friendly, and maybe I was in a very specific mode when I started playing this game. And, like, based on the, you look at some screenshots of the trailer or something like that, you might be like, oh man, yeah, that's the way to play this game. That's crazy. It's not. It's not. At least for your first time playing it, because you will quickly get overwhelmed and not understand what is happening. So I had to play this a few times, and I'm really glad I came back and played it some more, because the first time I did not understand what was happening. This is a deck builder where, first of all, developed by Siege Wizard Interactive, published by Indie.io. The premise of this game is ridiculous and hilarious. You are a wizard breaking out of prison so that you can attend your niece's birthday party. That's ridiculous, right? It is in this super gritty fever dream, heavy metal. And when I say heavy metal, I don't necessarily mean the music. I'm talking like the movie sort of thing, like just this weird, grimy artwork kind of stuff. Like it's sketchy, it's strange, it's alien, it's like monstrous. It's gross and grotesque. That's how everything really looks. But what you're doing, it is a roguelike deck builder. But in addition to like these cards, you see your wizard's fingers, not the thumbs. The thumbs are not included, but you have the fingers out there. What you are doing is you are crafting spells using these cards. So those cards all have different elements that coincide with, what it is like the card does. So like an element, let's say, for example, because some of them aren't necessarily like just fire or water or air, but some might be like bone or arcane kind of things, but they will all have different symbols. Whenever you use one of those cards, you are going to assign them to your fingers. And by default, they'll want to go to a specific like part of your fingers, like whichever one that you click on first is going to want to go to like your left pinky first and then your left ring finger. But you can swap those things around and assign them to specific areas. You want to try to create the best combo and also overlap where you can. So like, let's say you cast one that's like fire and arcane, just those two symbols on it. But you have another card that starts with arcane and then does, let's say, bone as the requirements to cast it. You can overlap those. So let's say that first fire and arcane, the arcane is on your left ring finger. So then your next card that is arcane and we'll say fire, you still start that one on that left ring finger. So you can overlap things that way. There's also rings that you can get and put those rings on the different fingers that will have different effects. You also might, depending on how you start the game, you can start as different classes, which might give you different benefits. One of which I started was like, if you don't assign anything to your left hand at all, then any spells that you cast with your right hand will apply twice, which is extremely powerful. But, there are times it's just like, you just really need to apply as many spells as you can for certain things. Like I have a couple spells that are going to boost the damage of whatever I do. I can't I don't have the ring or the finger capacity to do it all on my right hand. So I'm going to have to apply that boost on my left hand first and forego the ability to do two of that same spell. So it's like a lot of management and stuff as far as that goes. The enemies are going to be casting spells right back to you or doing damage and stuff. They might break your fingers, which if they do that, it is a possibility that you are going to be taking damage because of your damaged fingers. There's a lot of give and take and a lot of management in this. And like some of it's going to sound a little bit complicated, but it's just incredibly fascinating. It is a very, very nuanced game with so many systems involved within it that the level of strategery is extremely deep and extremely complicated, but in a very fun way. So I would say like if you are somebody that really, really likes getting into systems and also like something just very absurd looking, this is a game that you're gonna really like. It kind of like the art style reminds me of like Helix a little bit, if you're familiar with those games, just in how weird and everything that world is. But the gameplay is just so incredibly deep. I loved this game after the second time I started playing it because that first round was rough. Shuffles and Scuffles is another roguelike deck builder that is released today as of recording this. So by the time you're hearing that, it is out. This is developed and published by Sour Circuit Studios. I'm not going to talk at length about this one because we did cover this one, at least the demo of this one a while back. I think during one of the Steam Next Fest episodes, not the latest one that we did, but one back in 2025. If you're interested in learning more about that one, you can go back, listen to that episode, and hear what we had to say. But the full release is out, and I think that this is a really cool game, and it's a very interesting take on the idea of a roguelike deck builder, in that you kind of have like these lanes in which the enemies are getting closer and closer to you, and you have your cards. And some of those cards have a very, very high cost when you have a very small, limited amount of mana that you can use to, or action points, whatever you want to say, but I think it's mana, to put into using those cards. So like, let's say you have, 3 mana is like all you've got, right? But some of those card costs might be 6 or even 9 or 12 because they might do very, very high damage. What you can do is like pour some of that into those cards over time. And then like the next time that card comes up, maybe you have dumped enough into that card to unlock it and actually use it for that turn. So it's kind of an idea of like managing what you can in the here and now while also planning for the future of that combat, of like knowing, okay, only one enemy is coming right now, but you can see enemies way off in the distance. Down the line, there's going to be a lot, right? So I'm going to, spend so much right now, maybe only one to do this, so I can keep dumping mana into these bigger cards, have them ready for when I really need them. And then when things are ready to get overwhelming or something, I have all my big cards at my disposal and I can wipe the grid because it's a 3x3 grid in which all these guys are on. So it's a lot of that. It's a lot of like using your foresight, your planning and everything like that. The other big draw to this game is the idea of you get to, in a kind of Dice-omancer way, in the way we describe that, you do get to manipulate things a little bit. You can't do it every time, but once you complete a wave or something, in that idea of you get to pick from like a few different areas you can go to either like buy cards, get rid of a card. One of the things that you can do is go to a place that lets you manipulate the cards that you have. Like it's almost kind of like an altar in the way of like Inscription had one of those. But here you have like all of these different like numbers and words on the ground, essentially. This is all like a papercraft, cardboard style world. So you can change and manipulate what the cards say. So maybe you can see one of the screenshots on their Steam page. It'll say like deal 1 freezing to 3 enemies for a cost of 3. You could see what other words you have. So maybe it's like deal 1 fire to 3 enemies, or maybe you change that to deal 4 freezing to 1 enemy, or deal 4 freezing to 5 enemies, depending on what you have. The catch to that, though, is the more like numbers you put in there, the cost of that card is going to go up exponentially. So like that in itself is also another thing that you have to balance. So it's not like you can create a card that's just going to be an instant win kind of thing. That's not the reality of this game. It's all, again, going to be a very yin and yang that you have to balance to really make a build work for you. But it's very interesting in that way. It's another game that has a level of strategic planning and thinking that I haven't seen in a lot of other games. So I really enjoy that. I also really enjoy the boss battles at the end of certain waves. You'll see like an image on their Steam page too of like the skeleton. That's like one of the ones that you could have done in the demo. I do want to thank Cyber Circuit Studios for sending us the full copy. I'm very excited to get all the way through that. But I've beat him and I've beat a couple of the other bosses. Those have all been very fun so far and have actually been my favorite part of the game. Another boon is you can pick specific classes and stuff when you start that will give you advantages or disadvantages too, like maybe more starting mana, things like that, different cards, etc. This is a game that has been a little bit more difficult for me to grasp than some of the other games that I've talked about today, but it doesn't make it any more or less interesting and enjoyable because this is a game I am still going to try to 100% get all the way through it. But yeah, it is definitely one that is like using parts of my brain in new ways that I haven't done when it comes to a roguelike deck builder. So I'm very excited to keep playing this one and see if I can finally get to the very end. Power up! Hey, if you're enjoying this episode so far, I know I said at the top, this could be the last episode, at least for a while, but I would still appreciate it if you could throw us a like, a follow, or share the episode or the podcast with folks who love indie games, because The main point of this podcast is to share indie games with other people so we can help support indie game developers. We do still have our YouTube channel going over at youtube.com/nerdsloth, where you can catch us playing some more indie games. We have a huge backlog of indie game Let's Plays over there. Or we still have our top 10 indie game series going on about bi-weekly, where we show off even more indie game recommendations because we really do believe there is an indie game out there for everyone.
Get ready!
Let me talk about a couple more indie games I played this week. Mr. Sleepy Man is one of the weirdest games I have played all year. I realize the year is still short, but this one is weird, man. If you like 3D character platformers, this is one for you to check out, especially if you like things that are unconventional and strange. This is a 3D platformer in the vein of a sandbox, kind of like Mario 64, in like you would go to those like big open world sort of hubs, and there's just like a whole bunch of stuff to do without like a linear fashion. A Hat in Time is another really good example of this, except that everything is so bizarre and so weird. I would say mix that with a little bit of the idea of Untitled Goose Game, because you really are encouraged to cause as much havoc and disrupt this world as much as possible. This was developed by Devin Santi, who had been working on this game for a long time. I think it was in development for like 6 years, maybe 7 years. Published by Devin and also in association with Monster Theater. If you were a 90s kid and you are familiar with the cartoons from Klasky Supo, things like Rugrats, Rocket Power, Real Monsters, Real Monsters, The Wild Thornberries, how everything had a little bit of a bizarre, rough look to it. Everything was just kind of disproportionate, a little grungy, eyes are too big. Sometimes colors were just like so strange, like everything was just sort of bizarre. That is the most similar approximation I can make to the design of this world. It's really getting back to a lot of those like strange 90s aesthetics that we haven't seen for a very, very long time. A lot of this does feel like something that we would have seen from that era, with a ton of humor to it. Like the idea itself is you're playing this little guy, Mr. Sleepy Man, who is essentially asleep the whole time. So I don't know if he's actually in this world or this is all like a big fever dream of his. I'm not entirely sure. Either way, I don't really care because it's funny. I don't know if it would be more funny if this is actually happening to him or if like it's just a dream. Maybe it would be more funny that this is actually happening to him and it's all like him sort of sleepwalking through this. But it is absolutely wild. Right away, like the very first thing you do is so funny. There's like this, gosh, I wish I could remember the name of this character, but the very first character that you interact with who's like trying to wake you up from your slumber while you were sort of like getting your tutorial in and everything is so funny, especially the way that he talks and sort of mutters to himself a lot and has to like correct himself a lot. Like he'll be like, hey, why don't you do this thing? Maybe it'll help. And then you do the complete opposite and he'll say something along the lines of like, oh, okay, well, I guess you can do that instead. There is just so much fun to be had. It's just an incredibly playful game. Again, you get like these lists of things to do, but there is no order in which to do all these things aside from the tutorial, which is extremely short. It's literally like, do this thing, go back to bed. Oops, you need to wake back up again. Go get this blanket, then go get a pillow. But to get the pillow, you have to leave the area that you're in. So like that basically second or third objective you get has you going to the open world and immediately leaving the starting zone, which is just this tiny little room that you've been sleeping in. So it moves you through that part very, very quickly and lets you get to the adventure, the action platformer stuff. And you get to do pretty much anything you want. I got to steal a car from an old lady. I ran a lot of people over. I crashed that car into the water and it sank. And I got into all kinds of trouble. Like my face ended up on wanted posters all over the place. I was hitting people with pillows, having a little pillow fight. I swam in a big bowl of cereal. I got to listen to some really awesome rock and roll music, like alt rock music that I was like, first of all, I need this soundtrack because I actually would like to listen to this music in real life. I woke up the moon, which has like a really creepy face with a funny mustache and it wears a little top hat on it. So many crazy things, and this all sounds insane, but it is insane. And it all starts too with you grabbing this game cartridge and putting it into a little console that all of it is suspiciously looking like some sort of bootleg N64. So it's obviously paying homage to that era of gaming and just that era of style and aesthetic and design in general. It is sitting right now at very positive, only 121 reviews, but like, hey, you know what? It is definitely worth it. I would recommend checking it out, especially if you like things that are just silly, absurd. If you want to play something just absolutely weird, this is one that you should check out. Final round! And to our final round, one more game that I did want to mention like really fast that did just release, and I have played it before, but I played the demo and it was quite a while ago, and I'm going to be playing some more of it, but I didn't get a chance to play it before doing this episode. This is Mythmatch from Team Artichoke. They developed and published it. This is like a match 3 style game, but in the vein of an RPG where you are playing as the goddess Artemis, who has been sort of outcast from the other Greek gods and stuff. Like they just won't take her seriously. So you're going out to venture the land among the mortals and everything, and you're just really trying to help them do things like fix up their homes, do different jobs, protect them. It's got a very anti-capitalist sort of message to it, which I really appreciate. A little bit of a feminist message to it that I also very much appreciate. And it was just really fun. I remember having a really good time with this back in the day. I love the art style of it. It's very, very cute, very simple. I really, really love like things that are like very like Greek themed as far as like the Greek gods and stuff or Roman gods. So like this appealed to me right away with that by itself. So even if the gameplay wasn't like, you know, the best, it was still kind of appealing to me, but I do genuinely enjoy the gameplay of it. It's a really simple kind of game that you can play on your Steam Deck or something, or your ROG Ally if you've got that, or I don't know if it's out on Switch, maybe it is. I definitely am going to be picking this up for my Steam Deck and playing it there. So check it out. This is Mythmatch, once again by Team Artichoke. Very worth it. So if you made it this far into the episode, you're probably wondering, where do we go from here? Is this going to be the last episode? Again, I don't know. But what I do know is we're not going to stop talking about indie games. We're not going to stop showcasing indie games in some capacity. We're just having to take a break for a little bit and then reevaluate how we are going to be doing that going forward with all the other things going on. I would also say that Nerd Sloth probably won't be Nerd Sloth in the future. That doesn't mean we're going away. That doesn't mean like our YouTube channel is going away. I think it's very, very possible you're going to be seeing a rebrand of everything once we are back and moving forward with everything. So just like stay tuned, kind of like keep your eyes out for all that kind of stuff. Again, I will be communicating all these things on social media as we are moving forward with stuff. I also have a new TikTok account because I actually made one for once, where in the meantime, as all this goes on, you can catch me personally talking about indie games. If you want to interact with me there, just search for Indie Game Guy over on TikTok and you'll find me there in a very informal, non-produced, very like poor audio quality at the moment way, just literally talking about whatever is on my mind about indie games at the time. For anyone that has been following Nerd Sloth or me and Joseph in our endeavors for the last, like 10 something years that we've been making content, especially podcasts, you know that we are basically like phoenixes. Every time something ends, we come right back with something bigger. So if anything, I would expect us to be slightly more organized and focused because we've been kind of scattered all over the place, especially with all of our different like media accounts and all these things. we'll be getting a little bit better of a handle on everything going forward. But with all that said,
game over!
If you had a good time listening to this episode or listening to this podcast, stick around for the bumper to hear how you can choose to support us if you want. You can also check the show notes for our link tree, which will take you to our YouTube, social media, Discord, and everything else to stay in touch. And no matter what, we and you together will keep supporting indie game devs. But that's game over for us. My name's Chris, and I'll continue in a future episode.
Continue?
Indie Game Arcade is recorded and produced by Nerd Sloth Creative. If you're looking for more gaming content, head over to youtube.com/nerdsloth for indie game let's plays and recommendations. If you'd like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/nerdsloth, where you can select a pledge and receive access to hundreds of hours of bonus content from everything at Nerd Sloth Creative. If you're an indie game developer and would like us to review your game or explore other opportunities, send an email to nerdslothcreative@gmail.com with the subject line Indie Game Arcade. Thanks for listening, and keep supporting indie game devs.